I sat quietly in the living room, sipping my coffee as I watched the rain tap against the window. The rhythmic sound of the droplets hitting the glass was calming, like a melody in the background. These moments, quiet and reflective, often made me feel the sting of loneliness. Mark, my husband, was away again on business, leaving me in the silence of our large, empty home. It was a familiar routine, one I had gotten used to over the years, but today felt different. James, my stepson, had returned after 2 years of studying abroad. I hadn't seen him since he left for university, and though I had been looking forward to his homecoming, I didn't expect it to stir up such a complex set of emotions within me. He wasn't a boy anymore. The shy teenager who had left was now an adult, and I wasn't sure I was ready to see him in this new light. When I heard footsteps in the hallway, I tightened my grip around my coffee cup, a flutter of nervousness stirring in my chest. His footsteps were purposeful, confident. "Lena, I am back." His voice, familiar yet carrying a new depth, echoed through the hallway. "Welcome home, James," I replied, my voice betraying the excitement I wasn't quite ready to admit. I had to steady myself, unsure of the wave of emotions rushing inside. As James entered the living room, I couldn't help but notice how much he had changed. Gone was the skinny, awkward teenager I had known. In his place was a young man who seemed to have grown taller and more muscular. He wore a simple black t-shirt, but it fit him perfectly, accentuating his athletic build. His face had matured to his sharp features framed by neatly kept hair, but more than his physical appearance, it was the quiet confidence in his eyes that surprised me. "You look different," I said, trying to sound casual. "It's hard to believe how much time has passed." I chuckled, but there was an ache behind my smile. James smiled in return, though there was a certain intensity in his gaze that made me pause. "I guess we all change," he said, his tone thoughtful. "But you haven't changed, Lena. You are still as graceful as I remember." The words caught me off guard, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. His compliment was sincere, but it made me feel a bit uneasy. How had this young man, my stepson, become so mature, so confident? The emotions swirling within me felt complicated, and I couldn't quite figure out what to do with them. I pushed the thoughts aside. He was just my stepson after all. Nothing had changed, right? Later that day, I decided to do something special to mark his return. I dug out my favourite dress-deep red, form-fitting, and stopping just above my knees. It was a dress I hadn't worn in a long time. I styled my hair and applied makeup with more care than I usually did, trying to look my best. As I gazed at my reflection in the mirror, I felt a wave of self-doubt. Was I really doing this for James? Or was there something else at play here? When I finally made my way downstairs, Mark still hadn't come home. It felt like a good opportunity to settle into the evening with just James. The table was set with fine plates, a soft candlelit glow illuminating the room. The three of us sat down for dinner, the conversation flowing as usual. Mark discussed his work, while James shared stories about his time abroad. But as the night went on, I found my gaze drifting toward James more often than I would have liked. The way he held his wineglass, the way he smiled, the way he looked at Met was all-consuming. At some point, I got up to grab another bottle of wine. As I was pulling it from the fridge, I noticed James had quietly followed me. He stood just behind me, so close I could feel his presence. "Lena," he whispered softly, "thank you for everything, dinner, the house, the warmth. It feels so good to be back." I turned to face him, our eyes meeting. For a moment, time seemed to slow. "You are beautiful," he added, his voice almost shy despite the intensity in his gaze. My heart raced, and I wasn't sure how to respond. His words had caught me off guard, leaving me speechless. The tension between us was palpable, though neither of us spoke of it aloud. I managed to offer a weak smile, then quickly turned away, my hands shaking as I returned the wine bottle to the table. Mark didn't seem to notice anything unusual, continuing to check his emails on his phone. I, however, couldn't shake the feeling of unease, mixed with something I wasn't ready to confront. After dinner, as we cleared the table, I tried to focus on the routine, but I couldn't stop my mind from racing. Every time James's voice lingered in my thoughts, my heart seemed to skip a beat. Later that evening, I couldn't sleep. James's words, his compliments echoed in my mind. His eyes, his smile, the way he'd looked at me with such warmth. I didn't know what to make of it all. As I went about my morning routine, I tried to push it all away. But the tension lingered, impossible to ignore. When I walked toward my closet to pick out my clothes, I noticed the door was ajar. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I saw him, James, standing in the doorway. He had been watching me. His face flushed with embarrassment, and he quickly turned his gaze away, as though caught in a moment of weakness. "I am sorry," he said, his voice quiet. I didn't know what to say. It was awkward, but somehow I wasn't angry. In fact, there was something strangely comforting about the connection we shared, though I couldn't yet understand it. "No need to apologize," I said gently, offering him a small smile. "It's just you and me this morning. No need to be embarrassed." James hesitated, his eyes flickering between uncertainty and something I couldn't quite place. I felt the silence between us grow thick, charged with unspoken tension. It was as if we were standing on the edge of something, unsure whether to take the leap or step back. The morning air felt heavier than usual, thick with an unspoken charge that neither James nor I could deny. I stood still, the silence stretching between us, but there was something in his gaze that made me feel both vulnerable and alive. I could see the hesitation in his eyes, but there was also an undeniable curiosity, as if he was waiting for me to make the next move. I wasn't sure what to do or say, but for the first time in a long while, I found myself feeling both afraid and excited. I couldn't pinpoint exactly why, but everything about the situation felt different. James wasn't the boy I had once known. He was a young man, full of confidence, and it seemed he saw me in a new light. My heart fluttered as I studied his face, searching for answers, but it was clear that neither of us had the words for this moment. "Come on, let's sit down for a bit," I said, trying to break the tension. The words felt like an invitation, but they were also a plea for some kind of clarity. I reached out and gently tugged at his arm, guiding him toward the bed. The space between us felt small, yet it seemed like an entire world separated us. We sat down on the edge, and the air around us grew thicker, charged with a mixture of confusion and anticipation. I couldn't stop my heart from pounding in my chest. Everything inside me screamed to pull away, to remind myself that this was wrong, that he was my stepson. But I couldn't ignore the pull I felt toward him. James sat next to me, his body stiff, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. We both remained silent, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on both of us. He glanced at me, his gaze lingering just a little too long, and I felt a warmth flood my cheeks. It was strange this was the boy I had known for so long, yet now he felt like a stranger in a way. He was no longer a child. He was a man, and for reasons I didn't understand, that realization made me feel exposed. "Lena," James said, his voice soft, breaking the silence. I don't know why, but I've always admired you. Not just for the way you look, but for the way you carry yourself. You've been strong, and you've always taken care of everything. It's inspiring." His words caught me off guard, and I could feel my heart skip a beat. What was he trying to say? Was it just a compliment, or was there more hidden in those words? I tried to brush it off, but deep down I knew there was more. I turned toward him, my voice shaky as I replied, "James, I am flattered, but you need to understand that I am married to your father." He nodded slowly, but his eyes didn't leave mine. There was a depth to them now, something I hadn't seen before. It was like he was trying to convey something through his gaze, but I couldn't make sense of it. He looked down at his hands for a moment, then back at me. "I know. I don't want to make things awkward, but I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. You've always been more than just a stepmother to me, Lena. You are someone I admire." My heart was racing, my mind spinning with confusion and conflicting emotions. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. I was supposed to be a role model, a protector, a stable presence in his life, not someone who stirred up such intense feelings. But despite the confusion, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of warmth inside me. He was right. I had always tried to be strong, to keep things in order, but this was uncharted territory. I looked away, trying to regain some sense of composure. "James, I am not sure what you are trying to say. I've always cared for you, but you are young, and tea here is a lot of life ahead of you." I could see the hurt flash in his eyes, and I instantly regretted my words. I hadn't meant to dismiss him, but I was trying to keep things in perspective, to protect us both from what was quickly becoming a dangerously emotional situation. "I just want you to understand that I care about you, but not in the way you are thinking. You are like a son to me." For a moment, there was nothing but silence between us. I could feel his presence next to me, so close that I could almost hear his heartbeat. My mind raced, and I knew I had to distance myself from this moment, but something held me there. There was a pull between us, an undeniable connection that neither of us could ignore. "I understand," he said quietly, his voice tinged with sadness. He stood up, and I could see the conflict in his posture, the way his shoulders slumped slightly. He wasn't angry, but there was a sense of disappointment in the air. I felt it too. A weight had settled in my chest, and I wondered if we had crossed an invisible line that could never be erased. I watched him walk out of the room, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. The bond we had shared for so many years, so familiar, so safe, was no longer the same. It felt fragile now, like something delicate that could break at any moment. I stood there, alone in the silence, my heart still pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to think or how to move forward. I wasn't sure if I had done the right thing, if I had said the right words. I had pushed him away, but in doing so, had I also pushed away something else? Something I wasn't ready to face. That evening, when Mark came home, the normalcy of the situation almost felt like a comfort. We sat down for dinner, and I tried to keep the conversation light, but my mind kept drifting back to James. To the things we had said, to the way his eyes had looked at me with such vulnerability. The dinner passed in a blur, with Mark none the wiser. He was absorbed in his work, his phone buzzing in front of him as he scrolled through emails. But for me, the tension that had been building all day felt like it was suffocating me. I wasn't sure how to make sense of it all. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about James. What had I done? What had he felt? Was it just a fleeting moment, or was this something that would continue to haunt us both? I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. The future seemed uncertain, and I was caught between two world zones that felt familiar, safe, and the other that was dangerous, unknown. And as I drifted off, I couldn't help but wonder if this was just the beginning of something neither of us could control.